the Buddha's teaching on mindfulness in the Satipatthana, his 10th discourse, where he talks about contemplating the elements within the body as part of mindfulness of body, is pretty central to a mindfulness practice. And there are subsequent teachings where he also tells us to contemplate the 6 elements. And so ordinarily, the 4 elements have consisted of earth, water, fire, and space, sometimes called air. And in this kind of more kind of interesting, nuanced view, where those 4 elements are certainly included, the 4th one gets sort of broken into 2: air, or sometimes wind, which connotes movement, and space, which is the 5th element, which connotes kind of that space in between the forms. So in the texts, it's obviously the sensory organs also have space, such as inside the mouth, where there is no flesh, right? Just the cavity of the mouth, the nose, the ears, and space also being that experiential quality that gives rise to a sense of refinement of awareness. And he also goes into a 6th element, which is consciousness itself. And so this is kind of interesting. How is consciousness related as an element, as a constituent of kind of the phenomenal material world, of the world of form? So we're going to explore, in particular, this view of consciousness, but we're also going to look at the other 5 as well, sort of in their own context, and how they apply to mindfulness practice in general. Very, very helpful teachings as part of what we call shamatha practice, or calm abiding, sustaining attention in an open but directed way without force, allows the mind to settle, and what arises is peaceful abiding, and it arises naturally. So what we're talking about is building on this foundation with these 6 elements, the foundation of what we call shamatha, or calm abiding, which is mindfulness itself. Mindfulness is a very particular form of shamatha practice, where we focus on body, breath, elements, feelings, mental phenomena, thoughts, and then ultimately realizations or insights. So we'll also review a bit of that as well, the teachings on mindfulness. So this one, the first one, is from the Visuddhimagga, which is part of the Pali Canon. It's one of the classical texts of the Buddha, and includes commentaries written slightly later, but part of the canonical writings. And this is called Body and Mind. When body and mind dissolve, they do not exist anywhere, any more than musical notes lay heaped up somewhere. When a lute is played upon, there is no previous store of sound. So when a lute is played upon, there is no previous store of sound on which it draws. And when the music ceases, it does not go anywhere in space. It came into existence on account of the structure and stem of the lute and the exertions of the performer, and as it came into existence, so it too passes away. In exactly the same way, all the elements of being, both corporeal and non-corporeal, come into existence after having been non-existent. And having come into existence, they too pass away. There is no self residing in body and mind, but the cooperation of the conformations produces what people call a person. Paradoxical though it may seem, there is a path to walk on. There is walking being done, but there is no traveler. There are deeds being done, but there is no doer. There is blowing of the air, but there is no wind that does the blowing. The thought of self is actually an error, and all existences are hollow as the plantain tree and as empty as twirling water bubbles. So some of our egos are probably going, oops, or maybe having a WTF moment, and that's fine. Those two are water bubbles twirling. And this next one is from the Sutta Nipatta. The Sutta Nipatta. It's called The Empty World. So, to the sage who sees what is good, I have come supplicatingly with a question. This is the Buddha speaking. How is anyone to look upon the world so as not to be seen by the king of death? Oh, excuse me. The Buddha didn't ask this question. Mogaragan asked this question. Okay. So Mogaragan, this is part of a larger text, by the way. So this is just one sort of isolated little piece that we're reading here. His disciple Mogaragan comes and says, how is anyone to look upon the world so as not to be seen by the king of death? Look upon the world as empty, O Mogaragan, said the Buddha. Being always wakeful, having destroyed the view of oneself as really existing, one may overcome death. The king of death will not see the person who thus regards the world as empty. So one of the questions that can arise here then, I think, is, well, if I, quote unquote, am regarding the world as empty, then I include myself in that. And one of the teachings around the 6 elements is to contemplate them internally and externally, and then neither internally nor externally. And part of that has to do with a dissolution of the boundaries. It has to do with kind of dissolving the barriers, the things that create these illusory perceptions of separation or separativity. And this is one area where the 6 elements are seen to be very helpful in the form realm, to help us basically acquire some kind of insight into the nature of ourselves, not as separate from the world, but also not absent from it. So we're not separate, but we're not absent. So we're not talking about a vacuum of self. We're talking about an absence of separate self, of permanent, conceptual, enduring self, because of the truth of change, which is also in the mindfulness teaching. Impermanence is part of that 4th foundation that we call insights into our practice. The 4 foundations of mindfulness, some of you maybe know this, it begins with a very gross level, just a simple settling into our mindfulness practice by meditating on the first foundation, which is body. Just coming into body, feeling the entirety of the body. The Buddha has many things that he instructs us in, one of which is with the breath. Breathing in, I'm aware of my whole body. Breathing out, I'm aware of my whole body. Breathing in long, I know I'm breathing in long. Breathing out long, I know I am breathing out long. He says, observe the body from within the body. This is part of the text, his discourse on mindfulness. And the second one is feeling, the second foundation. So body, breath, feeling. The experience here, we're not talking about emotions. We're talking about kind of the sensory feeling that inhabits our body. So, for example, I may feel slightly restless in a given moment, or I may feel calm. I may feel a little uneasy or maybe heavy. So these are all kind of more sensory ways of experiencing sense of feeling. So what is the quality of your abiding in this moment? From an energy, from a sensory aspect, and observe those from within them, not in a dissociative way, right? So really get to know them, abide within them, but do so with clarity, with ardency, and with mindfulness. So we're not basically overcome by what we're feeling. We need, after all, the equanimity to abide within the feelings, within the body, within the sensations. And yet we also want the stability. We want the clarity within them. This is how we really get to know. We lean in to the places of suffering that we're experiencing. The third foundation. So we have body, feelings. The third is mind itself. And interestingly, this is still seen to be gross level. Mind, thoughts, cognition, images, and emotions. Emotions in classical Buddhism are seen to be part of mind. Now, my take, some of you have heard me say this over and over again, my take is that emotions exist on all the different levels. They're embodied. If you're depressed, you're going to feel really heavy in your body. Your body will be heavy. If you're anxious, you'll feel those gamma waves in the brain just firing really quickly, and you'll be on sort of alert. And so the feeling state is part of that as well. And so are the thoughts that come, that perhaps even perpetuate what we're experiencing. So what we call thought forms, grosser level forms of conscious activity, which include cognition, what we can call affect or narrative or reactions that are conceptual and so on, perceptions, those are seen to be also things that we bear witness to mindfully. So the fourth foundation is really engaging with our own mind. And then the third foundation rather, the fourth foundation then is what are called dharmas or dhammas in the Pali. And this is often poorly translated as mental objects. What on earth does that mean? What this really is trying to tell us is that this fourth is actually the beginning of what we call vipassana. So the fourth foundation begins insight. So based on the first three, we are gaining some clarity based on what we experienced by practicing mindfulness on the first three foundations of body, mind, and feelings. Here we get to know, here is the nature of my suffering. When this thought enters my mind, it triggers a feeling in the body. Thus, when a feeling like this arises, here's how it gives rise to this kind of thinking. Right? We're also looking at the patterns. Why am I suffering? And noticing the impermanent nature of all of those experiences as they gather and they disperse. That insight also clues us in that there is a part of us that is not going along for the ride, that is bearing witness, that is holding these experiences in an open way. And this is what the Buddha is talking about. If you want to overcome the quote-unquote king of death, is abide in such a way that your mind is, your mind is being held. Your body, your feelings, your mind are all being held by open awareness, what we can call natural awareness. So we start to disentangle ourselves, to unhook from all of the grasping, all of the aversion, all of the things that cause us to be triggered. The habitual reactive body begins to settle. This is one of the keys here that he's talking about. What we can call the changeless, the only thing that is unchanging in our experience. This continuous, what the Buddha calls in this discourse, continuous mindfulness. and the source from which that exists, which, by the way, is ubiquitously present, or we would never experience it. Would you know how to manufacture that which exists between the thoughts? When one thought dissolves and another one arises, that space in between, how do I create mindfulness? I wouldn't know how to create it, but I know how to release into it because I know it's there. So these elements, the 6 elements, the reason that I went through this sort of background of the mindfulness teaching is that as part of that very first foundation, mindfulness of body, the Buddha is telling us to really contemplate the realm of form, to do a deep dive into the realm of form. This is what distinguishes Buddhist meditation largely from other forms of practice, such as transcendental meditation. Nothing wrong with that, not knocking any of it. But this kind of practice is saying, let's not be quick to exit the body. Let's take a deeper dive into this form realm and see what insights we gain from this. So I jotted down 5 ways that practicing with the 6 great elements, or what are called the Mahabhutani, great elements, that's what that means. And it refers to these 6, which are, again, earth, water, fire, air or wind, space, and consciousness. So why would we engage in practicing with these 6 elements, the 6 elements practice? And there are sort of 5 qualities. And one is equanimity. Equanimity in the midst of impermanence. As a mindfulness practice, to notice the impermanent nature of every experience that arises, we get to see that there is no permanence to any of these experiences. There is no sense of complete inherent essence. Now, we do have experiences of ourselves throughout our lives that are consistent, but even those one day will dissolve. They'll dissolve back into the emptiness or the shunyata. Actually, it's more a matter of dissolving back into the profound openness that is basically all things. So within that, we can learn equanimity. We can learn that it's okay that the earth element is constantly changing around me and within me, within this body. It's okay that the water element is shifting, moving, changing. Even within this body, the water element is constantly flowing. And it's carrying impurities out of the body, through the urine, through other ways. We are drinking water, we're taking it in constant flow. The fire element, heat, that which heat is heating the sun, because the sun is, of course, heating us, but the sun is also being heated by a confluence of factors, right, of conditions. That heat is the same heat that arises in my body when I'm meditating. If you've ever noticed your practice building heat in your physical body, it's the same heat. It's not like, well, there's this kind of heat, there's that kind of heat, there's this kind of heat. Okay, maybe there's dry heat, there's moist heat, fine, but that's the heat itself isn't the distinction here. It's more mixed with the water element. You see, these things kind of are mutually influential. And then, so fire, the air element, or sometimes it's translated as the wind element. And here we're talking about movement. We're talking about the vitality, the dynamic energy of what in yoga is called prana. Breathing in, I'm not just breathing in a dead form of oxygen. It's not just an element on the periodic table. I'm breathing in vitality. I'm breathing in energy. I'm flowing that energy through my energy channels. So this is why wind, and in the Tibetan tradition, we have a rich history of what are called tsalung, or wind exercises, that actually harness these properties of energy flows through the body to free them and to purify. So this is really, when we talk about air, we're talking about also flow. We're talking about change and impermanence, not just a static quality. And then space, interesting. Now we're getting into more refined, much more subtle qualities, experiential qualities. If you've noticed, both the 4 foundations of mindfulness and the 6 elements are taking us on a journey from gross level form experiences that we can see, touch, feel, that are sensory, to very, very refined, subtle qualities. This is true in really the cosmology, the cosmology that we find in yoga, in many of the traditions of South Asia, as well as in Buddhism and such. That things exist on a continuum from gross to very, very subtle. So here's what we're doing here with these 6 elements. Now we are moving into what's called space. And yet, interestingly, space is not a vacuum. When you go outside on a clear day, or you go outside like on a day like this, where we had a lot of cloud cover, now it's beautiful. There's some orange sun coming through as the sun is setting here. But above and around those clouds, is that space, quote unquote, a vacuum? Is it utter nothingness? Of course not. Nor is the space in my ears, my mouth, my nose, the space around me in this room. Ultimately, emptiness does not mean nothingness. And this is mistaken by some people who really like the fact that nothing exists at all. And this is not what the Buddhist teachings are saying. But there is an experience, there is a profoundness, a fullness to the space in our experience of it. And as we sort of, deconstruct a bit the form realm and allow ourselves to settle back and release back and let go, this is one of the keys, let go into a space, a spacious experience, even of our own mind. We've refined our experience down to a very, very subtle place. And finally, once the mind is settled, we can experience consciousness, the 6th element. Why is consciousness considered an element? Because it has gross level form aspects. So thought forms are seen to be consciousness. There are many different kinds. What we call vijnana, that's a term that means sort of the sensory mode of consciousness. So if you're hearing an object, you have a sense organ, such as the ears, right? They're picking up the sound of an object, which may be a dog barking. So we have sensory object, we have that which is making noise, and we're obviously hearing it. But the consciousness aspect is what is in between. It's that sentient quality that is aware where what is hearing and what is heard are unified simply in the consciousness experience of hearing, only hearing. And so this is seen to be also gross level, to a point, but much more subtle than the physical body and the more physical aspects of the elements. So there's vijnana, which is the sensory aspect, and then there's what's called chitta. Chitta, this is not the world's fastest land animal. We're talking about C-I-T-T-A or C-H-I-T-T-A. Thank you, Marie, for laughing for that cheesy joke. My humor as I'm aging is getting worse. So I hope somebody will point it out to me and say, you know what, don't even go there. So one last little sort of philosophical framework, the 12 links of dependent origination. Have any of you heard of this little nugget of Buddhist wisdom, that things arise in dependence upon causes and conditions, such as the sun. The sun exists because of all the causes and conditions of whatever happened at the beginning, the creation of our cosmos or universe, at least this universe, arose out of something, out of manifesting causes and conditions, many of them. So form realm, there are sort of 12 causal principles, and we're not going to go through all of that. We can do that another time. But the point I'm making here is that the fifth and sixth of these 12 links of codependent arising are number 5, vijnana, and number 6, citta, or mind. Interesting. These are all seen to be contributing factors to the arising of phenomena. So this is why consciousness is considered an element. There are these gross level forms of thought and experience and contributing factors and projections, perceptions, all of these things that are contributing to our experience of the form realm. And in some cases, creating them because they are causing us to act, to behave in a physical way to impact our environment. It's very interesting. So here we have consciousness in its grosser form as an element until our practice allows us to settle down into what we call bhavanga. Bhavanga, the mind in its ultimate resting state. B-H-A-V-A-N-G-A, bhavanga. Bhavanga is that sort of sense of awareness where consciousness is so refined it is only awareness. And then when a thought comes, the citta, out of this bhavanga come all of these reactions and conditions once more. And then as that thought dissipates, because we know it's impermanent, the mind settles back into this resting state. So this process is always arising and dispersing. So this is one reason why consciousness is seen, I think, to be an element. And in the text in which the Buddha teaches about the 6 elements, at the very end he says, and it is pure and bright. Consciousness remaining pure and bright, wakeful. And it is that then looks back at these 6 great elements, at the other 5 great elements actually, but it includes consciousness itself, and purifies them through the awareness of this bhavanga, this mirror-like mind. How beautiful is that we can do this? So we're not eradicating the elements. God forbid, there is so much beauty around us in the world. Michael P. has this beautiful rose in his picture. I can see all your faces, your smiles. This is something to celebrate. And so that which responds from the heart, from clarity, from appreciation and gratitude, is almost reaching back out and purifying these elements. In other words, we've transformed our relationship to the phenomenal world in such a way that our view is all-inclusive. It's not just reactive, it's not just preferential, and it's not self-arising any longer. It's just available. So in this way, our experiences are like ocean waves, right? The water of the ocean in which all things are unified, and a wave comes and it dissipates back in. When we see that clearly, that this is the nature of mind, then this is the beginning of what we call wisdom. So I mentioned, the last thing I'll say here, why would we meditate on these forms? What are sort of some benefits that we can get by doing the practice of the 6 elements? Number 1 was equanimity. I think that's where I began, and then I trailed off onto this last bit. For noticing impermanence and having that stability, that reliability to allow things to be impermanent, to arise, to disperse, to basically appreciate the flow of things rather than needing permanence, needing things to stay. The second one I would call connection. The interconnection, basically the recognition that we are fully in a state of what we can call interbeing with the world around us. Interconnection, interdependence, we can call it. That by practicing on these 6 elements, we're really recognizing the ubiquity of these elements around us, within us, and basically dissolving the barriers, no inside or outside. We are just also belonging to these elements as they exist in nature. The third, intention. That as we cultivate, let's say, the element water or earth, that each one comes with its own particular quality. So I'm going to consult here my Peter Harvey text, and I really appreciate how he talks about these elements. Let's see. Here we go. Yeah. So he's talking here about the 4 elements largely, but that earth element is largely representative of solidity. So we're contemplating kind of the density of being in a material form of some kind, and that it gives us a sense of stability in our practice. When we contemplate the earth element as being like a mountain, we are stable, we are upright, we are solid, we are present, perhaps even unmoved. This is that equanimity piece. And we can rely on that shape, on that material quality of earth for stability in our practice. He says that water, interestingly, is associated with cohesion. How is that? How does that work? What he really is meaning here is that, and I've heard this in some of the Vajrayana texts, that water is that which unifies. It's not just fluidity and flow, which is on its own beautiful. That clear water gently flowing through the body can help us soften around difficult emotions like anger, or fear, that we can experience that sense of flow. But here, it's really, when he talks about cohesion, he's talking about unity. Water is that which unifies. It doesn't distinguish between over here and over there, because the flow is engaging almost in a shared experience of different places. Yeah, it doesn't lend itself to separation. And then a fire element is energy, and then that one's perhaps a little more clear. And then finally, wind, as I mentioned, motion or movement. Now, space, if we add that 5th element of space, we're also talking about more refined awareness. We're talking about experiencing space, whether it's open sky or our own mind, as being spacious and free and open and clear. And then finally, consciousness, the quality of forming and relinquishing until we rest in the mind in its natural state. So this is why this third part, intention, this is all part of that, is to intentionally cultivate beneficial qualities in our practice, to build capacity, if you will, with stability or solidity, with fluidity and unity and water, with energy and healing or purification from the fire, with movement, with flow, but also vitality and energy with air, and then spaciousness, basically encountering openness, profound openness and brightness of mind in what we call emptiness, and then ultimately consciousness as purified, as reflecting back a purified form of these other elements. So the fourth, so we have equanimity, connection, intention, and then the fourth is response. Here we're taking intention and saying, okay, I'm practicing, and I'm starting to feel really caught up in a narrow thought of some kind. I'm starting to feel myself agitated in some way. So which of these elements are helpful? Perhaps the water element. Let's settle back into fluidity, into flow. If I'm starting to feel spacey or checking out or drowsy or sleepy, maybe I bring in the earth element, the stability, the solidity that I need to continue sitting, to readjust in my posture and explore the body as earth. So this is what I mean by response. We can use any of these elements in a responsive way to something that arises in our practice. They're tools, basically. And then last, the fifth one is dissolution. Basically, what I mean by this is that the Buddha's teaching of these 6 elements as being an opportunity to dissolve the barrier between inner and outer, to basically become part of our environment. And that includes space, it includes consciousness. So inner and outer are the same. The water in the ocean is the same as the water in my body. The heat of the sun is the same as the heat in my body that's digesting my last meal, and so on. Yeah.